Alright, let's see, in 45 minutes, gotta leave at 5:30, let's see what I can pull off. Taking this comp for our new site and turning it into a landing. This is an early comp, but I'm turning it into a quick landing page for us to get at least something up and running. So, open up Photoshop, let's convert it over from a PDF to Photoshop file. I want just page 1. So I can choose many pages. I'm just going to choose a single page. And I want it at 72, which ends up at 1400 pixels, which I know is what they designed it at. Great. So I'm going to grab this up here, and then I'm going to take the footer. I was about to edit this like it was an actual Photoshop document, but of course it's not. So normally I'd be able to turn on and off various pieces of it, so we're going to have to do little bits of trimming. So let's crop out that, and let's grab our little footer here. Copy it, drag it up top. Yeah, it's really moving slow. Let's just try this for now. It's being super laggy. I think it's QuickTime. I want to put something to differentiate it a little bit. Some little border or something. Actually, let's try that. We want a little something to set it off. Let's try just that real quick. I don't think I need anything else. Let's just grab that, drag it up there. Locks in. It's not perfect, but it's decent. Another thing we're going to run into is these things right here. These are overlays, so it's going to be kind of tough. So I'm probably going to end up having to drop this whole this overlay that they put over here and just make it a solid background yellow. Okay, so now that I've blocked it out, I need to start figuring out what are my spaces going to be in HTML. So I normally would do this in my head, but we'll actually draw it out here. So we've got our header. You can be super precise, but it doesn't matter to me to be too particularly precise because this is just kind of dummy. And then we've got our footer divider, and you can actually just command drag that, and then that'll give you an edge, that edge for you to lock up against. And then command click that again, and then another edge to lock up against for our rulers. So I know this is 1400 pixels wide. So if I were in Photoshop, I could just hit T and it would give me hard edges around this, and then I could drag a ruler against those. Unfortunately, this is just a flattened image, so I just kind of have to guess. And I'm like, well, this is, if I go to probably not 800, you know, it's somewhere around here. And I mean, I can even, if I do Command T, it'll give me a center that I can drag against. I'll check that center and I say, does that look like the center of these guys up here? And I'm like, it's kind of close, but I feel like I'm missing this a little bit. So I want to, and I'm like, oh crap, I'm not dragging anymore. I don't know how wide this is. So I'm going to look at it, I'm like 707. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that this is supposed to be 700 pixels. There's probably better ways to take that last pixel off the edge, but I'm just going to try this. While we're at it, let this be an advertisement that while I love the Magic Mouse Apple trackpad thing, it's not very good for image editing. Okay, so that's going to be my text block. We're probably going to convert it to be real text, but at least for the initial comp, I'll do this. So that's going to be our 700 by 700, which seems to be pretty centered. And again, I could do the same thing here. I could go here and see, does that little marker I have line up with the middle here? Yeah, it's pretty darn close. So I'm going to call that our magical number. Okay, so now I've got some spaces here. Obviously, this thing out here doesn't fit at 700. So why don't we get a middle space, a middle ruler, so that I can do all my... And let's actually see if this one's centered. This should be 350 if it's centered. Perfect. Man, I'm good. So this is going to be something more. So I command drag out, and then I'm trying to find what number do I think that they worked out to. And sometimes you can just drag it right there, but like pretty sure they didn't use 966. Well, what did they use? Let's maybe say they used 1000 and gave it a 40 pixel padding, or a 20 pixel padding on either edge. That sounds like reasonable. And again, you wouldn't be dealing with this stuff most of the time. What did I say it was? 1000? Right, so 200 on either end. So I'll just drag this out to 200. There's ways to do that a little faster, but I just am doing what I'm familiar with. Also, I'm really irritated with how slow this is moving. Oh, that's QuickTime slowing it down. All right, so I've now got to basically build out these various spaces. So normally I'd be isolating these layers and creating these assets. So I'd create a logo.png, create a JPEG for each of these. This is something I'm not going to output as actual image, although I will just for the demo. And then I would create like a nice big wide version of this that's totally ready for responsive. And then I generate assets for each of these icons. The problem is when you look in here, they're already super low quality, so that's going to hurt us. And plus half of these, I don't have the full-size image, and these are overlapping things. So I'm actually really restricted in my ability to do awesome stuff here. So I'm probably just going to say, well, I'm going to use this image, and then I might kind of duplicate the noise out to the left and the right so that I can make sure it'll stretch out on a wider device. This I'm going to have to do some pretty big work on. Thankfully, I think I have this Titan logo somewhere else that I can work with. And then these guys are just going to have to go entirely, and I'll just kind of have to deal with it. So what can I start building? Well, let's just take this, and I'm going to find, I might have to do a little searching off screen, but I'm basically going to find what's the core color of this yellow. Now, you see we've got this grit everywhere, so that makes it really tough to find that core color. What I'd love to find is a place where it looks like the grit is missing, and find like a color that's the core. And I think I kind of found it. So if you're brush mode, and then you hit command, you get your, what's it called, your dropper, eyedropper. So now my foreground has that color, and that looks relatively close to what I want. And so then I'm going to grab something. I could use that marquee tool that I've been using and fill it as a new layer. But when you want big amounts of space, that's a lot of pixels that the Photoshop's going to have to calculate. So it's better to use a vector there. So I just basically drag it a little bit outside. Okay, great. Now we've got that color. Clearly it's not doing what I want. So M, once I'm in here, if I'm on M, I can start changing the opacity with just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to switch this opacity 0. Okay, switch this opacity down a little bit so I can start remembering what it is I want to put there. I don't mind that these things are gone. I don't think I'm going to recover a high enough quality version of this where I can cut this out and cut this out to use it, so I'm just going to throw it away for now. So really what I need to recover at this point is just this logo. There are ways I could eventually recover it out of here, but I would love to find it elsewhere if possible. So I'm going to just kind of have a note to myself to do that. I might have to do it after we're off this call, this recording. So there's my logo. Okay, what's next? We've got our text, so we're just gonna, let's drop these guys out of here entirely. Actually, let's drop everything under this line because there's that little ragged edge there. So Command or Shift Backspace. I filled it with white. Oop, I missed a little bit. Go down a little further. Fill it with white. Okay, that's better. I'm probably gonna have to adjust this spacing a little bit. So why don't I actually grab it and grab like a nice space here. Also, I just realized that this music might be really loud against the mic. I really hope it's not, because otherwise you guys won't be able to hear anything else I say. So I'm going to copy it, paste it, make sure it's in there good. Okay, great, and now I can delete that whole space there. And then I say, oh crap, there's a transparent layer out of the background, so I'm going to create a new solid color background layer. Fill it with white, and then drop it down below. And like I said, when you got a lot of pixels, even if they're all the same color, that takes space. By default, these fills will have a bitmap mask, so I'll just delete this mask and that just saves me some space. And now it's my background. Great, so I've got a background, and I mean you can make that any color you want, but the background of this one's clearly white, so I make it white. Okay, cool. So, alright, so I should just stop that. Okay. So this is ready, just waiting for the logo. This is header. Actually, this is the screen cap. So this is our body text. Header BG, logo, footer. Okay, just because I want to do it this way, I'm going to start building out some groups. Some of these features, for example, groups are new since, you know, half the amount of time I've used Photoshop there weren't new groups. So I bet you there's like a new group keyboard shortcut that I should probably learn, but at the moment I don't know it. So I still do some things with the mouse, especially if they were added after Photoshop was created. So okay, footer, header, body. Footer, 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 header, logo goes in the header, and then body text will go in the body. Slowly, we're basically getting to the point where we don't need the screen cap anymore. Actually, we're there. Screen cap does not matter. We bring this up to full height, and now all we need to use the screen cap is for later. We need to use it for positioning the logo. And actually, there's an easier way to do that. Let's just do this. Copy that part of it and paste it over here. Now great, we can drop our ugly old logo and we can drop the entire screen cap. We don't need it at all. I'll keep it around just for posterity. Obviously this isn't ready, but this is showing me for placement for later. Okay, great. So assuming that I end up working with these pieces, then I need to start turning these into assets that I can get rid of, that I can export, but also that I can gauge my placement based on. A lot of people will use the Photoshop, what is it? The Save for Web, where you cut the whole thing up. If you want to learn that from someone, you're going to have to learn it from someone other than me, because I'm just a little too old school for that. That was never a thing, so I never used it. It wasn't ever a thing when I learned, so I never started using it. So I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit, but I'm tighten based on kind of what I have in front of me, because we've dropped some things, and I'm like, okay, that feels kind of good. Okay, great. At this point, honestly, I think the next best thing would be to grab this logo, from somewhere, but why not convert it over to HTML, because I only got 30 minutes. Again, I don't know if I'm going to have time. So I'm probably going to grab HTML5 boilerplate. You don't always need all of it, but the boilerplate, even if you're going to cut half of it out, is going to be a really safe place to get your starting pieces. You know, they're always definitively going to have the best, you know, header up top and everything. So I'll usually come in here and then just trim out a whole bunch of crap. We'll do Sublime Text for now because this is front end. Okay. So anything here I don't care about, i.e. I'm going to eventually, well, we can use this for now. I'm not going to care about Modernizer at the moment. Don't care about i8. This is a content. Pull in jQuery. I'm not going to use jQuery at the moment. And I'll pull that in later. Okay. So what do I have? Almost always, when you've got something like this, I'm so used to PHPStorm. You're going to have some kind of external wrapper. Because it's centered, and you've got multiple layers of centering. So you've got some wrapper that's going to live at this width, and you've got an additional wrapper that's going to live at this width. And since individual elements within the wrappers can go wider based on these widths, you've got to have a wrapper inside each, because this right here, this has got to be header, but header, since it's yellow is full width, header has to be full width. So you've got to have a wrapper within full width that constrains this. Now with header, it's actually fine right now. You can just text align center. But like for here, you need to have a wrapper in here. For here, you need to have a wrapper in here. So usually you're going to have, so for sites where that's not an issue, where everything is constrained, even the background colors, you can just do a single div class equals wrapper. But with this, you need bigger parent elements within which there are div class equals wrapper. You'll notice I'm using divs, not header, only because HTML5 is not nearly as kind of like a all-around go-to as people would act like it is. So we can talk more about that later one day. All right, so let's try this. Div class equals header. Div class equals body. This is the point at which I really wish I had Emmet up and running. Okay, cool. So it used to be the thing that used image replacement. You don't want to use that anymore because Google actually doesn't like it that much, so you literally just want to do something like this. Okay. And then I actually know that we want to emphasize this a little bit, so we'll do this. Again, if this were in Photoshop, I could just copy it all out, which would be really nice. M dash, gotta remember what that is. Okay. And then we've got two footers here, so I've got to decide kind of how I want to handle them. I kind of think it's just going to be one footer. It's going to have a padding top, and this is going to be the background with set to no repeat. So I'll just start building the DOM elements. So I've got image, and then I've got two columns. You got to figure out what the structure for those are going to be. Often stuff is where it's kind of like it's a list, even though it doesn't look like it. You'll do a UL and LI, but we've got two of them. Yeah, I guess we'll do this. Notice that I'm not worrying about capitalization because that's something you can add all in CSS later. And then finally I'll build these out, and I recognize that these are going to be right aligned, so I might start thinking about that a little bit, but again, it's just a list of things. So I'm like, okay, well, two lists. Let's call this footer contact, and then this will be footer social. And you notice that I'm using the BEM strategy, so if you want to know about that, the two things that I would suggest people use are OOCSS in general, and then wow, my mind is escaping, totally blowing my mind. Well, block element modifier, this is good, but I actually prefer the CSS wizardry. I think this is a really great intro to it. And then OOCSS, these are all varying types of doing OOCSS. But then what's the yeah, I subscribed to the guy's newsletter. SMAX. Scalable modular architecture for CSS. I suggest reading through all of those. All right, and hash 8212. Great. So for social, so we've got one of these for each. Again, wish I was using Emmet. Oh well. And I think that's it for our DOM. And so at this point, everything's just going to be style. So we got 22 minutes. What can we do in 22 minutes? Well, we need those wrappers I was talking about. So this theoretically can just be center aligned. This needs a small wrapper, this needs a large wrapper, and this needs nothing. So the question then comes down to, do you do one? When you imagine looking at the rest of the site, what are you going to need? What's going to be reusable? So let's actually pull open our preview, skim down, and this right here, this space right here is a common width to have. So let's see right here, where does that end up with us being? Is that the same width of the footer? Where's the footer? The footer is the same width as that. So that's the generic wrapper, and this is a special internal paragraph. So we're going to make a main wrapper that's further out, and then this will be a special wrapper that's even lower in. So let's do the body, which is going to have a wrapper. So the next question is it a wrapper that's different, or it's a wrapper with another wrapper inside of it? I think I'm going to call it, I'll probably regret this later, but I'm going to use a totally non-semantic. Well, we'll try this. Wrapper, narrow, and wrapper. That'll give us some more flexibility for the future. So this is footer, so we could do okay, cool. So we're basically built out here. So let's just do CSS inline actually. So what are things we need to style? Header, logo, body, probably nothing actually. Wrapper, narrow, footer, contact, footer, social. All right, those are our pieces we want to style. Cool, there we are. So let's start making it look like what we actually have here. All right, so we can do a reset. We can make sure we have these ones, but I'll just, well, I guess I can just denormalize that CSS. Okay, so we just pulled in, normalized that CSS. We're still going to do all this inline though. Okay, so header, we've got that magical background color. Oops. Why is this not working? I'm using this guy. Oh, let's see. This is Frank DeLoop. And I use him for picking my colors. I could have done it in Photoshop, but this helps to not rely on Photoshop because you don't always have Photoshop open. So, all right, logo. Not sure yet. So the difference between rems and ems. Rems are always the same no matter what their parent is. So one rem is one rem no matter where you are on the page. They only rely on the HTML size. Ems are dependent on the parent. So one em means one thing in one place and one thing in another place on the same page. There's a little better adoption of ems, but at this point I don't really care. All right, body. See if I can find a non-gritty. So again, a lot of normal development doesn't involve this kind of stuff because you're going to actually have a real CSS file available to you. Let's just try this. All right, and then wrapper, I think I set 1,000 pixels with a 20 pixel. Yeah. Width, 1,000 pixels. Probably convert that into rems in a minute. And then padding left, 20 pixels. Padding right, 20 pixels. And so the moment you do that, you say, oh, but what about your box sizing? It depends on which one of these you're using. All of those in the past, all the time in the past, I would have used Paul Irish border box. And all the time, this is the main thing I would do. And basically what this says is, if you have a width of 1,000, it doesn't matter what padding, border, or anything like that you add, it'll stay 1,000. Because if you don't determine this, if you have a width of 1,000 and a padding of 20, then your width is going to be 1,040, and that'll always throw things off. So if you use this, like he says, if I say the width is 200 pixels, gosh darn it, it's going to be a 200 pixel wide box, even if I have 20 pixels padding. This used to always be the thing. Chris Coyer just did one like a week ago. I don't even know if it's going to show up, but it was pretty clever in terms of a way to make it a little more extensible in case you have like plugins or modules that you don't want to use box sizing. It was using what's it called? It was using inheritance a little better. So I would kind of recommend people do that in the future, but I don't know where he posted that. So we're going to ignore it right now. So let's go back to this. So this just says use border box sizing, which is just the way I just described it. No matter what you do to it, the size is what you tell to be. I just use this indiscriminately. I just use it everywhere. Okay, so that means our 1,000 pixels is actually going to be 1,000 pixels wide. So wrapper narrow. Let's see, what were my things? I think it was 700 pixels. 700 pixels. So I'll probably want to do at least one thing to both wrapper and wrapper narrow, which is margin left auto, margin right auto. Okay, we're starting to get something working here. I know that body's got this thing right here. It's 100 pixels, so default is going to be 16 pixel for a rem. So you can just do this, and you're like, okay, 6.25 rems. Usually I'll round those down a little bit. All right, back the next morning. Let's see if we can finish this off in 15 minutes. I had to leave 15 minutes earlier than I expected, so this is where we ended off. I don't really remember how far I'd gotten, so let's just pull our pieces up here. All right, so we got normalized CS in there, and then we're doing our CSS inline. So we've got some basic styles there. I haven't outputted the images yet. That's one of them. So let's take a look at our Photoshop, see what we got. Okay. I'm going to say actually all the text in the entire site is going to be this color. So rather than just making it for the body, I'm going to drop it up in the HTML. Okay, and then the whole footer is text transform uppercase. At this point, I mean, there's, in some ways you can be, you know, very intentional about moving piece to piece, but since I'm just trying to go quick, what I want is quick wins. So what are the things that are just really clear that I need to do, bust through them really quick. Okay, so one of the things you can do is you can choose, do you want all your unordered lists and list items to have their styling by default or remove their styling by default? In the past, we would do resets that remove that styling, but then anytime you had ordered lists in line in your text, you have to re-add the styles, which I actually don't like. So I would either explicitly do that. Normally what I'd do is in Sass, I would have a placeholder that'd be something like, you know, strip UL styles or something like that, and then I could just extend that placeholder. But since we're not using Sass, I'll just manually add that to a few of them right now, and then later I'll go back and clean it up. So footer and contact are both going to be that same way. They're ULs that shouldn't actually show all that kind of stuff. So list style type none, padding 0. We'll probably have to drop some styles off the LIs themselves. Actually, maybe not. This will depend a little bit on browser specific stuff, but I'm going to trust Normalize to handle that for me. And then we need to get them side by side. So these days you've got a few options available to you. You can use Flexbox. At the moment, Flexbox has pretty good adoption, but I9, 10, you're going to fight a lot there, so that's where you have to be concerned. And unfortunately, we need to be concerned about those folks. Especially I10 is pretty brand new, so we can dump 6 and 8. We can't dump 9, so we won't use flexbox. So we'll go back to old school. We're going to do floats. It's not a nice even kind of 50%. You see this is offset quite a bit from both of our markers. So that's going to be a little bit of a pain to work on. So for right now, I'm just going to make this 50%, this 50%, float everything, and then I'll tweak my numbers in a minute. So make them both with 50%. Actually, it can't be 50% because this has got to live in there somewhere. That's my HTML for that. This isn't required, but the benefit of doing this is that now I have 3 kind of elements that are kind of together. So footer mark, footer contact, footer social. I have a little more control there. Again, I'm going to do a little more nuanced work there, measure it out, but I'm just going to do a 10%, 40, 45, 45 for now. All right, so we need to float these in-betweens. So it's going to be footer contact li. I want each of them to be half the width of what's available to them, and then to float left. And then we'll have to do a little bit of work to break our floats out. And then the same thing here. We want them to be a third of what's available to them because we're not using a fourth one, and then floated left. So let's see where we've gotten so far. Okay, so they're not floating relative to each other, so let's put a float on our actual containers. So we actually have 3 containers now, so we need to make a new one that is for all our containers. And SAS would make our life so much better here if we were using it. Okay, so they're relatively floated. We got the basics up and running. So now, remember we want to use a background image, so let's set that background image. So at this point we have the responsibility of figuring out how far do we want this to go, and since we want it to go somewhere, what are we going to do to make it go far out well? You could make this image very, very, very large, or you can make this image just a noise and then kind of layer this stuff on top of it and see what you can do. My default would be to do a repeating noise pattern, because then it can be any size you want, and then you can see how well it, and then you can just overlay the gears on top of it. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. One of the first things I would do is trim it down to a nice even number, and you're just gonna kind of like, again, if you're doing noise, you're pretty nervous that some of your edges are gonna get nasty here. So this is not necessarily how you do it in the long run. You'd probably have some kind of generative function on the noise instead that you could apply just across your entire template. But since we don't, we're just gonna see how this does. So in Photoshop you can define a repeating pattern and then apply that pattern. But this is kind of the quick and dirty way to just look at it and say, do I see any really bad edges? And I see a little bit of distortion there in the middle, and then we've also got to check the outside edges. So basically grab these and say, okay, if I've got that, well, how does that edge look? It looks relatively clean, and then we got to pull this whole thing down, and then we say, how does our top edge look? Alright, so we'll see a little bit of banding, but it's not going to be the worst thing in the world. So that means that this sample I've created here feels pretty good. So let's save it out. I almost want to say that a GIF or ping might be okay. If you don't know, optimize GIFs and pings for things that have a limited color set. So this is all relatively similar, but once you see in here, this noise has got a ton of colors, which ends up with a much bigger image. The problem with the JPEG is that you can't have any artifacting on a repeating image, so you want to keep your quality pretty high. But I think that's probably going to be okay. So let's call that, what's the name of the site? TIG demo landing. And then footer repeating BG. Okay. So even though we made it able to repeat, we only want it to repeat to a certain height. And the easiest way to do that is just to set the background to be that height and then set it only to be able to repeat X. So it's going to be in the whole footer. So background, image, URL, and then image slash, I already forgot, footer repeating bg.gif, and then background repeat X. And then that image is 100 pixels tall, so we want to do an interior padding of that. I don't mind using pixels if it's specifically related to an image that has a pixel size. I use M's for text related stuff, but that's fine. Okay, I must have grabbed the name wrong. Footer repeating bg.jpg slash image slash footer dash repeating dash bg.jpg. What am I missing here? That's what it is. Oh, it ended up under the CSS directory accidentally. There we go. Okay, so we've got that, but now we also want to put that actual central image in there. So let's figure out what our center spot is, because it's always going to align against that. And then let's select outwards and find a good spot. Okay, let's do it right there. Now I am noticing there's actually a little banding in the noise right here. So theoretically I could try and do it there, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. So okay, yeah, let's go central, go out a little bit. Those are my marks. Gosh. To there and to there. And then normally I would pull these things out without the noise in the background, but since I'm separate layers, I'm just going to do this. So now I can save it out again as a JPEG, and since this JPEG I'm not worried about repeating, I purely have to focus on what makes it look good. So there's various ways to do that, but the quick and dirty way is just to bump up your, basically pull your quality way down and bump it back up until you feel like the quality is good, and you can use the 4-up and the 2-up versions to do that. But I like to just say, look, does it look good to me? It looks good to me. Save it out. It's pretty big, so I can run some optimization against it later, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. So TIG demo landing image footer gears JPEG. So we could try multiple background images, but again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to do this. Okay, so the benefit of doing outside of wrapper is because if you look at it right now, we'll end up with the gears pushed down by 100 pixels, which is not what we want. So rather, I can go back up to my footer, I can give it a text align center, and then I can give all of its children, you know, via whichever method I prefer. I'm going to use this method right now, since I've already got them listed out. I'm going to reset it back to text align left, and then this padding top that we've got can be on footer wrapper. There we go. Nice and lined up. Oh, we dropped the repeat X. Let's bring that back in. There we go. Nice and good. Although it's offset by 100 pixels, which it doesn't need to be because this image is 100 pixels, so that doesn't even matter anyway. Great. There we go. We'll probably want a little bit of offset on it though. Now this has to do with text spacing, so I'll probably want to do this in M. So it's like 26 pixels. So it's not, it's, what is that, 1.5? Yeah, 1.5 rems. So I will give my footer wrapper margin top of 1.5 rems. There we go, looks nice. Okay, need images, 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 need fonts for these. I can work on font sizes, line height, and then pull in an image, and then we'll actually be good to go. We got 2 minutes left, so what can we do in 2 minutes to make it just look as fantastic as possible? The strategies to fix things like this down at the bottom are myriad, and picking which one's going to be best and implementing it well can often be a pain. The thought you'd have to top of your head is, well, I'll just do fixed to the bottom, but the problem is if you fix it to the bottom and then you have a short enough screen that overlaps this text, you're stuck because what are you going to do? They can't scroll because it's fixed over it. So you could put like a big heavy margin bottom on the body, but there's other solutions that you might prefer over that. Also mobile. Okay, so we've been doing all these things predicated around the idea that we're only ever going to view it 1400 pixel wide browser, which is totally not true. So what I did was I hard-coded a couple widths in there. And what you basically want to do on these things is just make them max widths. Now, of course, you need to do more than that. You need to think about, first of all, you need to think about responsive in general. But like as you start scrunching this in, you might find as you take a look at our wrapper and arrow, we don't want that text to totally butt up against the edges. So you need to think about those things when you do this. So maybe what you really want is max width of 740 and then padding. Or maybe you keep max width of 700, but you give it margins. So basically, like, start thinking at the beginning, how do I build things so they still look the way I want? You say, oh, I can't do that because it's a wrapper, right? So you need to use padding. So let's do this. 740, padding left, 20 pixels, padding right, 20 pixels. So it should look exactly the same as before, but now when I crunch it in, we're going to keep a nice 20 pixel wrapper in there. Also, you want to look at your images and say, do I want this image to resize or not? So one of the things you'll often do in responsive to make sure that all your images respond correctly is give it a max width of 100%. Like that. Sometimes for these types of UI elements, you don't want it because it means it's going to crunch up and it's going to feel really weird. So this one, we actually don't want this because, look, it's no longer fully overlapping our CSS section. That's kind of weird. So there's things you can do around that, but the easiest one is to just drop the max width of 100% on that one. Or max with 100%. So we would just change that one to be, we'd probably class it something like for gears. And then we would give it a max width of auto. So bring it back to, so even though most of our images are going to be max width and like that, it's going to, whoa, what the heck? Max width auto, apparently that's not right. None, maybe? There we go, max width none. And then of course we want to see what we can do to make sure it center crops instead of whatever. But thankfully this site was very well designed with responsive in mind, so at this point all I'd have to do is probably tweak the font sizes and the line height a little bit, and then break this out into to vertical stacks versus horizontal floats. Okay, so we're out of time, but I realized that one of the things that that people have talked about a lot, wanting to know how to do, is build out assets from Photoshop. So I've showed about it a little bit, but basically what you want to do is isolate the asset as much as possible. You want to decide what the final asset's going to look like. And again, a lot of people use Photoshop's like fancy safe or web slicing features. I've never been satisfied with those, but they might end up being exactly what you need. So in general, I'm going to look at my asset and I'm going to be thinking in terms of HTML, how much space do I want it to occupy? Sometimes it has to do with click targets. So I could theoretically make this big, but I want a bigger click target. Am I going to do that click target in HTML, or can I do a bigger click target in Photoshop? You know, that always depends. I tend to do small, make the image just the size it needs to be, because then it's more flexible, and then I can always use padding to add bigger click targets in HTML later. So I would grab this thing. So now I also have a nice little template, so I might end up even like using like a, just make that, and that's my selector, which means I can then, you know, come back and later grab the same size, but you can also drag your selection around, so you can ignore that selector if you don't want. So normally what I would do is first I'd do Command-Shift-C and then paste it in, and of course this is, in a normal document, this wouldn't be our final thing for quite a few reasons, but for this one, this is actually going to be our final, so that's it. But a normal document, now that I've got that size set up, Where's my other document? Oh, that same tiny little thing. What is going on, Photoshop? Okay, so normally that wouldn't be right because it's, you know, for example, it's got that white background baked in and we want this to be a transparent PNG probably. So I would do that because that's the best way to set it to be the right size for your thing. So if you copy a transparent PNG, let's show you real quick. You copy a transparent layer of any sort in Photoshop. And you're like, okay, I want it to be this big. So you copy it, open a new one, you paste. You found that's not the size you had selected because your selection, your copy and your paste trims down to the size of the actual asset itself. So the best way to change that is what I'm talking about. So I will copy the full thing. I'll go like this. And this actually probably isn't the best way, but this is the best way that I know of. So I'd love for somebody to teach me something different. And then I grab my assets, put them over, you know, do whatever it takes to line them up. You know, get it all nice and precise, and then you can now drop out that background layer for spacing and you have this set up the way you want. So if somebody knows a much better way to do that, please let me know, but that's kind of what I end up doing most of the time. So okay, so you've generated the space for your asset, you put your real asset in there, and then often you're going to need multiple sizes for retina and that kind of stuff, and then you also might have to do, like, you might be doing spreading, whatever. So the majority of the time, if I've got any more complexity other than just grab it and spit it out, I'll actually end up making like an embeds directory in my PSD directory and then make a separate PSD just for this. So then you're going to export it, you're going to save it for web. Your options, your primary options are JPEG, GIF, and PNG. JPEG is good for stuff with lots of colors, especially photos. Pull your quality down as low as you can. Optimized and progressive is a good way to do it. So yeah, pull your quality down as low as you can and then bump it back up a little bit lower than you can and then bump it back up until you're comfortable. GIFs are good for animations or images with no transparency with a limited color set. And then PNGs are for images with any kind of transparency other than just binary. So GIFs can technically do transparency, but every pixel is either on or off. So it's not going to be a great kind of transparency because you don't have any nice soft edges. So PNGs, you have to do that. And PNGs are just kind of tending to be the future a little bit. The problem is Photoshop doesn't compress PNGs well, so you need OptiPNG if you end up doing that. I guess I'll show that in a second. So let's say I'd actually, yeah, I can do that here. Let's just say I actually had a transparent PNG here. So there you go, nice and transparent, fuzzy edges. I can't use a GIF for this because a GIF would have really hard, sharp edges, and you can see that along there. That's no good. So I'll use a PNG. You need PNG 24 to get that alpha kind of stuff in Photoshop. So I'm going to save it out. So 1.6 kilobytes for that small little image. Let's just take a look at what size that image would be in a GIF. Yeah, 1. So thankfully, ooh, that's no good. Get that out of there. Optimize me, please. I have this thing, command line app, which I think is from Homebrew. And I just say opt-ping, optimize me please, stop ping, and then it trims it down for me. 9.51% decrease. I kind of hope to have a little more of a decrease, but still, it helps. And then I can use that image in there. So then I would just go in and I'd say, well, it's in the wrong spot, but I might even already named it already. Footer icon Twitter. There we go. And then we can do all kinds of styles on them. You'll probably end up wanting to do, you know, something like that, and then you can also do stuff with the image if you want. And you can say for all this footer social, you know, oops. Again, this would be so much friggin' faster with Sass. You do something like that. So that's the basics of it. I'm out of time for what I was going to do, but next thing I would do is I'd pull in a web font, I'd figure out my line height here. I would tweak these so that they wrap well on mobile. I'd fix the spacing on these and these. Remember, we just did 10%, 45%, 45%, and make them all line up better. Figure out why. You see there's this little lip here, so I outputted those are not quite the same size, so I'd figure that out. And then I'd actually, so once I'd made sure it looked relatively good on these different sizes, I'd pull it up in the Chrome emulator, and I'd put up an iPhone 5 version, and then I'd try that out. And then I'd do the same for the Android Nexus 5, and then I would pull it up in the iPhone simulator for Xcode. So I'd pull up an Xcode and I'd go to File, Tools, iPhone simulator, and then I'd be able to see how it actually looks on the iPhone, and then I'd put it live, and then that'd be it. So hope this helped a little bit, and hope you enjoyed watching.